and welcome to my December wrap-up. These are all of the books that I read in the month of December. You can see that things are a little bit different behind me. I got a real working tripod for Christmas, and it's going to be one of my most used gifts, I'm sure. And the pitter-patter of Lola's feet on the linoleum tile. She never gets allowed into this space because she chews on the floor. So she's in here right now and she is very excited. So hopefully the pitter-patter of tiny little puppy feet will chill out after a bit. But for now, here we are, ready to talk about the books that I read in the month of December. First of all, I'm going to talk about the 3 books that I am still currently reading that I will maybe finish before the new year, but probably not. Definitely will not finish this one before the new year because this goes, ooh, there's a glare, because this goes, I think to January 6th. Let's see. 7th. This goes to January 7th. So I won't be finishing this. I started it in November, read it, am reading it all through December, and it will finish in the month of January, but this is Watch for the Light readings for Advent and Christmas. And I have already marked this as finished because I wanted to put it in Goodreads because I wanted to put it with my December reads. But I will continue to read it straight on into the month of January. Then I am reading Blitz by Daniel O'Malley. This is on my December TBR and I've been reading it, but I haven't gotten very far in it and I would like to continue reading it. I will take that into January with me. I got this for Christmas and I'm already a good deal into it. We'll probably finish this before the new year. It's not from a TBR or anything. I just picked it up. It's part of the reason why I probably won't finish Blitz before January. So I'm really enjoying The Big Bang Theory, the definitive inside story of the epic hit series, but I think it'll be a finish in January, even though I started it in December. Okay, so now let's go over the Christmas reads that I finished in the month of December. I read Meet Me Under the Mistletoe by Jenny Bayliss. This will be my last Jenny Bayliss. I did not enjoy this one. And I shouldn't have gotten this one because I did not enjoy the previous 2 that I have tried to read by her. This one was set during a holiday. A bunch of very kind of socially diverse friends reunite. There's a lot of sad, sad stuff in this book. Trigger warnings for suicide and marital affairs and all sorts of just really hard things to read about. I did not want to be reading about it for a Christmas read. So I am not going near Jenny Bayliss books anymore. On a totally different note, I read The Santa Suit by Mary Kay Andrews and loved this book. This is such a feel-good Christmas book. It's very short. This is exactly what I want a Christmas book to be. This had a little bit of romance, a little bit of mystery, a little bit of small town, a lot of banter, not a lot of steam, a little bit of steam, but not an overwhelming amount of steam. This was just pure joy and I loved it. I read Miracle on 34th Street and didn't love it. I think that I'll stick with the movie from now on, but I'm glad that I own this. I'm glad that I read it. It feels like something special to have. I really enjoyed reading the introduction and the conclusion or the information author's note at the end, but the story itself was not as dynamic in written form as it is on the screen. So I'm glad that I read that, but I don't know that I'll ever read it again, but I'm never getting rid of it. I read The True Gift by Patricia McLaughlin, and this was a joy. This is also a really short one, but it has gorgeous illustrations in it. There were moments in here where I was terrified because it's all about cows. I was terrified that bad things were going to happen. I was on the edge of my seat. It's also all about books. I was on the edge of my seat with fear over what would happen to these cows and what people's intentions were for them. And without spoiling anything really, I will tell you that no cows are harmed in the telling of this story. So read with security. It is just such a sweet, wonderful, home feeling kind of book. And I would, Lola, you're being very loud. And I would highly recommend it. As a read aloud, as a read for an adult looking for that Christmas spirit, or as a gift to give to a young reader in your life. It's a very good book. I read Christmas at the Ranch by Anita Hughes. I love Anita Hughes books. They're not everybody's cup of tea. I like how they're kind of the same story all the time. This one was very much in the same vein. All her Christmas books are kind of the same, about a woman who's relocated to another spot than she normally resides. She usually starts out in New York and ends up somewhere else. This time it was like Wyoming or Montana. She is a writer and she's kind of agoraphobic. She's created a bit of a safe space for herself where she writes from and lives from, and that all gets blown wide open when she, as a writer, has to go and take care of an obligation for her job. And that small change in her life opens up her life, and there's a mystery, there's romance, there's found family, there's family reunification, there's winter, there's snow, there's a fire, there's all sorts of things. I read the book in about 4 hours and I loved every second of it. It is exactly what you want to be reading at Christmas time. It's exactly what I want to be reading at Christmas time. I read All I Want for Christmas by Maggie Knox. This I was really looking forward to because I loved, the holiday swap. I was going to call it the sister swap. The holiday swap. And that last year was the perfect Christmas book for me. It was so lighthearted. It was so kind of unbelievable, the storyline, and yet really feel good and such a happy ending. I was wanting the same kind of formula from this particular book by this writing duo. And this one, it was just so serious. And also, the miscommunication hinges on something that is very serious that I really don't think that a miscommunication would actually occur over. This was not my favorite. It was just not my favorite. I didn't care about either of the main characters. It's told through their perspectives. I did not like the step up on the steam. The first book did not have the kinds of scenes that this book had. Not that that's not okay, but like it wasn't what I signed up for in Maggie Knox. It was trying too hard. Honestly, I mean, Christmas is worked into this, but the book could have been set at any other time of year. It did not have to be Christmas, really. Just change one or two things and it wouldn't be Christmas. The main thing that I loved about it, though, see this little dog down here? He belongs to the guy, and the guy has a real soft spot for dogs. And there's just a lovely thread of dog care and ownership throughout the book that I really appreciated. Otherwise, it was not a win for me. Sarah Hogel's Just Like Magic, on the other hand, was a hilariously weird romp of a romance that I loved. I would like to read more Sarah Hogel, and I think that I will definitely be reading this again next year. It was so silly and weird. I mean, basic premise is that this woman is she used to be like a major influencer and she isn't anymore, but she sees her whole family as being incredibly successful and wealthy and rich, and she doesn't want to admit to them or the world that she has lost everything to bad investments and gambling. And so she has been squatting in a person's house. She was house sitting for them and they passed away, and she didn't inform anybody, and the woman apparently had nobody to come and claim her home or anything. So this influencer has been, what's her name? Betty. So Betty is squatting in her home. She just never left after her house sitting gig should have ended. And one day she gets drunk and she plays Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You backwards on a vinyl. She doesn't mean to, but she does. And this invokes some weird clause in the contract of the universe that makes the Christmas spirit manifest part of itself in human form. And this guy, this manifestation of the Christmas spirit, looks like a Ken doll, but acts like elf, like Buddy the Elf. He can grant her any wish she wants. His mission is to give her the Christmas spirit again. But her desire is to rebuild her wealth and influence again. And so she wishes for things like, I want my old house in Hawaii, but he's like, I can give you something better, and builds her like a gingerbread house in the middle of this winter town. She says, I want a really like fast, expensive car. And he says, I can give you something better. And he gives her an old red, like 1950s truck that spits cookies out of the glove compartment. So their missions are at odds, and it is heartwarming and hilarious. It is kind of a Christmas Carol sort of story turned on its head, and it was lovely. I highly recommend it. Highly, highly recommend it. So those are the novels. I read 2 stories out of this A World Full of Dickens, 8 best-loved classics, tales retold. I want to show you the images. So you'll see that I read Oliver Twist, really read Oliver Twist, but I also read this short story retelling. And just the pictures in this book are phenomenal. But I also read A Christmas Carol. This was my Christmas Carol this year. I read A Christmas Carol with my students as well. And I watched 3 different versions of A Christmas Carol, the movie. But I read A Christmas Carol in this version for myself this year on Christmas Eve. It gives you the cast of characters, and then it starts to tell you the story, and it gives you just these amazing images. I am so about this book. If you ever have a chance to get this, I definitely think you should. The stories are retold in a way that are really digestible. The stories are told in a way that are really digestible to kids, but they have enough to them that they make an interesting read for an adult as well. I don't recommend that you read them before you read the actual novels if you're intending to read the actual novels, but I do recommend reading them after you read the actual novels. They just add a different dynamic, and the images in this is just so gorgeous. So beautiful book, beautiful book. I also read and enjoyed the pictures in this book. This is Michael Hague's Treasury of Christmas Carols, and it is mostly images, mostly really beautiful images, but it's also 3 different Christmas carols, I think 3, told in story form. So you could sing them, or you could just read the lyrics, and the pictures tell a story that ties in. Oh, they're so cute. Tells a story that ties into the carol, but they also just kind of tell a cute story on their own. So there's Jingle Bells, Deck the Halls, and We Wish You a Merry Christmas. I also read Refuge by Anne Booth and Sam Usher. This is a short, picture book about the nativity story. So it does tell the nativity story, but it starts at the point where Jesus has been born and the angel comes and tells them that they have to flee. And so they run away, and the major theme through this is finding the people who are helpful, finding the people who will help as they seek refuge, as Mary, Joseph, and Jesus and their donkey seek refuge. And it's told through the perspective of the donkey, which is really sweet. It's a really wonderful book about displaced people, but it doesn't get political, and it's not overtly religious. You could read this and it could be a story about any family. That's the point. It could be a story about any family. Lola, you're kind of manic, babe. Lola, stop. Stop. It's enough. I read I read a story. I read Rosamund Pilcher's Christmas with Rosamund Pilcher. And I heard somebody call her Rosamunda. Is that really her name? Rosamunda. I'm going to stick with Rosamund, and apologies if her name is actually Rosamunda. But I really enjoyed this. This was like a blast into the 1980s, really. It has recipes and pictures of her at home and Christmas trees and holly and all sorts of things. It's got some nonfiction stories in here that she's telling, but it's also got a fiction story at the end, and just lots and lots of like Christmas memories, and this is how she does Christmas, the Christmas in Cornwall. Just really feel good. If you're into Rosamund Pilcher, I would recommend it. Lola, what are you doing? I'm a little bit distracted. This may not have been a great idea to film over here, but I'm gonna keep going with it. She just sighed at me like I'm the bane of her existence. She was like, all right, I'm almost done. I'm going to hurry through these. I read all of the short stories in a glove shop in Vienna by Eva Ibbotson, and I would now like to read something longer by her. I really enjoyed this. I was going back and forth until I ran out of stories in this one, but I was reading Little House Christmas Treasury. This is just chapters from different books that have to do, different books by Laura Ingalls Wilder that have to do with winter or directly Christmas. This was a lovely, like, nostalgic visit back to my childhood. But I also read these until I ran out of those, and then I had to read lots of these in a row until I ran out of them, and that's when I read the two short story retellings of the two Dickens books. This was really great. They were all set in winter. Some of them were set on Christmas. They were all dark. So dark. So many Christmas stories are so dark. And yet they were also enjoyable to read. I am intrigued by her writing style. I would like to try something. I know she's written a lot of children's books. I'll try those. But I would like to try romance by her, because I know she's written those as well. And I think that they're kind of take them or leave them, like Marmite-ish. Like, people love them or they hate them. They accept them or reject them. And I think based on the magnitude with which I enjoyed her short stories, I might really enjoy her longer romance books. I read several of the short stories in this collection, 12 New Mysteries, all featuring Miss Marple, and I did not like this. I did not like this. I'm not going to blame it on the fact that it's short stories. I'm going to say that Miss Marple is a completely different person in every one of these stories. And I read the one by Alyssa Cole, I read the one by Lucy Foley, I read the one by Val McDermid, and I read the one by Ruth Ware. I just gave up after that. So I do feel like I read quite a few of these, and none of them reminded me of the real Miss Marple, and none of them reminded me of each other. So really, it felt like I was reading some mystery short stories that all had a character with the same name. Like, I read a bunch of short stories that all had a character named Mildred, and there was no meaning behind the Mildred by the time I had read the fourth story. So I just, thank you. So I just feel like it was a big fail. Like, what does it add to the legacy of Agatha Christie? What does it add to the story of Miss Marple? Nothing, I don't think. And so I'm left wondering why. Why does this book even, not on the table. I'm left wondering, why does this book even exist? Lola. Hey, Lola. Maybe calm down a little bit. What do you think about calming down? It's like she's been dreaming of getting up here all her life. And now she finally is. And it's too much. It's too exciting. Hi. stack of books to get through. So I did read the last of the originally picked for Bean's Big Book Bash books, and that was Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. So much of this did remind me of All the Light We Cannot See, except that the big difference is that we all have a communal comprehension of the setting and the context for All the Light We Cannot See. We all have some understanding or image in our head of World War II and Europe, Western Europe, and those characters and the events that they may have been involved in that kind of create those characters. So he's trying to tell a very similar kind of story with all of these disparate storylines with a communal theme of home, of coming home, of leaving and returning. That's what's supposed to stitch all of these stories together for us, but it's not enough, I don't think. We needed something more stable than a concept to try and pull together all of these stories. Each story is quite interesting, unique. No barking. No barking. No. Each story is quite unique and engaging and interesting. Thanks. But ultimately, I did not feel like this was the same quality or had the same impact as All the Light We Cannot See. That being said, I would like to reread this someday in the future. There is something about Anthony Doerr's writing which is exceptionally inviting, and no matter what he's writing about, there is a warmth and a care to it. So while I didn't care as much about these characters, and while this is a different story, and while I don't think that it's cohesive enough, I also think it's going to stick with me, and I'm going to want to revisit it someday. So do with that what you will. It's not as good as the first book that I've read by him, but it's a whole lot better than a lot of books I read this month. I read Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist. This was a reread for me, and in fact, this was my third read in the last 2 years of this book, because I read it for the first time, and then I read it for a paper that I was writing about depictions of childhood in Victorian literature. So I read this, which is from the beginning of the Victorian era, and I read Alice in Wonderland, and then I talked about those two as examples. And so I actually kind of had to analyze quite a lot of this, and then I just reread it again for the Dickens Along. But the thing is that I love this book. I don't care what anybody else says. I don't care what anybody else feels. I think it is definitely one of my favorite Charles Dickens. It remains that way. When I think about picking it up, like when I thought about picking it up for this third read, I was like, third read in 2 years, obviously I'm going to be bored. No, it just draws me in. Dickens is... He's such... Things are falling. He's such a siren for me. He writes, I respond. I love Charles Dickens' writing, and I love Oliver Twist. I read A Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers, and I did not like this. When I finished it, I thought, you know what? It'll probably sink. It'll sink in. I need to give it time. My initial reaction is too dramatic. No, I really didn't like it. It was so boring. I liked the first chapter where the monk is being introduced to us, and we're learning kind of about what the changes that he wants to make, and that they want to make, and then they leave to go make that change, and I was bored out of my mind. And then they meet the robot, and I thought, okay, now things will get better, and I was still bored out of my mind. It's so short, and I felt like it took me a century to read. I don't think that series is for me. which makes me really sad because I was really looking forward to it. I've had it for a while and I've been really looking forward to reading it. And I did, and I didn't like it. And that's okay. It's okay. I don't have to like all the books. I did, however, like this book, The Women of Chateau Lafayette. It was just the right book for me at that time. It was just the right book at the right time. It scratched some itch I didn't even know I had. The moment I opened it, I was just consumed by it. I did enjoy two of the characters more than the third. I really enjoyed, they're on the back. I really enjoyed Marthe Simeon, and I really enjoyed Adrienne Lafayette. Beatrice Chandler I thought would be my favorite, but I didn't connect the same. I really, really loved the 1940s storyline, and I thought that tied so well with the 1774 storyline. And now I want to know everything I can about Lafayette's wife. I want to read just everything I can find about her. The reason why I want to read everything I can is the story that's told in this book, but more so it is the incredibly detailed author's note at the back of the book, which tells you so many of the things that she left out, so many of the things that she changed to make the story work more smoothly. And so now I'm so curious about the real story of this woman. I loved The Women of Chateau Lafayette. I will read more books by this author, even though the other two books that she has out, something about Hamilton and something about the wife of Hamilton, and I think something about maybe Martha Washington? I'm not sure what the other one is. Neither of her other books seem entirely appealing to me, but I loved her writing style. And I liked the way that she developed characters, and I liked the way that she wrote women, and I liked the way that she wove history into story. And I really appreciated how she told us just plainly at the end, like, this was fictional, this was factual, and this is more that I couldn't add. So I really appreciated that. And I will read more by Stephanie Dray. I finally read, after owning it for a year and not getting to it, Kate Raculia's Bellwether Rhapsody, a novel. I read this on the same day that I read Christmas at the Ranch. I read Christmas at the Ranch first, and then I picked up this one, Christmas at the Ranch. It's so sort of saccharine and sweet and lovely that I wanted to kind of balance it out with something a little bit dark. And this one on the back says it's a genre-bending page turner full of playful nods to pop culture classics, from The Shining to Agatha Christie to Glee. And I thought, well, that will be a great balance for Christmas at the Ranch. So I started to read this one. And it reads very quickly. I read it in, I think, about 6 hours, 5 or 6 hours. That was a day that I just devoted to reading. And on the one hand, this has so much potential. On the one hand, it has such an awesome idea. On the one hand, it is very clever. On the other hand, there's so much going on in this book that it's too much. It's way too much. This needed editing like crazy. She's trying to tell too many stories, and I think she's just doing it because she didn't feel the strength of her main storyline. I feel like she's kind of trying to compensate for something that she thinks is missing. And she's also trying to create a bunch of red herrings for the mystery that's going on. But the mystery is big enough and windy enough and strong enough to have stood on its own. We did not need all of these distractions of these teenagers and this band concert trip and the hotel and all of these things. We didn't need all of this. We only needed the main storyline about the apparent murder-suicide at the beginning of the book and the storyline that follows from there and the one girl who saw it. We didn't need all the other things, and there's a lot. There's a lot. I would have liked it told in a much simpler way. Also, she is, like, on the one hand, I said it was clever, but also on the other hand, it's clever. Like, you never quite forget that there's a person, like an author, behind orchestrating this entire thing, and that they know you're there. They know you're reading. haha. Like, that's what it felt like a lot of the time. The times when I lost myself in the book were when we were making progress on the real story. And then I have to say that the end I thought was phenomenal. I really, really loved the ending. So I would definitely try another book by this author, but Bellwether Rhapsody wasn't my book. It wasn't my book. I'm glad that I finally read it. I am. But it wasn't what I wanted it to be. And it's never really fair to judge a book based on it being something that it's not. But that is where my experience lay with it. And then finally, oh no, not finally. Wait. I'm going to mention a couple of books that I don't have copies of. I read on my Kindle A Holiday by Gaslight and loved it so much that I am working more of, I can't remember her name right now. I think it's Mimi something. I'm working more of her books into my 2023 reading plans. She's got one called The Siren of Sussex, and it has a sequel to it. And so I'm going to give those a try and see if I love them in print form and in novel length as opposed to the novella. But I loved this novella. And if you have never read A Holiday by Gaslight, you can get it for a couple of bucks. Sometimes it's in Kindle Unlimited. On Kindle, and you can also get it in paperback, of course, but you can get it on Kindle and you can read it there, and it is just a delightful Victorian romance Christmas read. It so feel good. There's tension there, but there's also a lot of historical accuracy and intrigue. It is a quick read, and it is a delight. I don't read a lot of things on my Kindle. In fact, I've read more on my Kindle in the last few months than I have ever read on my Kindle, to be honest. And I'm loving all the things that I'm picking up. I think I'm learning that I need a certain kind of book, a certain kind of story to make it through on my Kindle. And this was definitely one of those kinds of stories. It is about a woman who at the beginning of the story rejects a guy who has not even proposed to her. She rejects him because she doesn't feel like they know each other. And then she has to go back. There's some family things going on, and she has to go back, or she decides to go back and give him an offer he can't refuse, to come to their family home, their country home for the Christmas holidays like they were planning on doing before, just to see if they can be honest and open with each other about communication. Of course, that's not a very Victorian thing to do, but the story is told in a way that makes it Victorian believable. There's very few, like nothing really hinges on misunderstanding, which I really appreciated, because that is my least favorite trope in a romance novel, is the idea that if someone would just open their mouth and say this one very natural thing to say, everything could be cleared up and there'd be no problems and we could all move forward with our lives. Nothing like that is happening in this. There are things people aren't communicating about, but it's like finances, which I find it reasonable to think that people are not necessarily going to want to communicate about finances. So I think that it's a believable book. It's a sweet book. It is a closed door book because it's Victorian era, and it is very funny and uplifting, and the characters, I shipped them from the very start. The banter and the conversation between them is just so like natural and authentic. It does have a very kind of like traditional setup for a romance. You've got the you know what a traditional setup for a romance is, and it is very much that. Sometimes that annoys me, and I was just lost in the storytelling this time, and I didn't even think about it. So I highly recommend A Holiday by Gaslight. I also read the last Miss Marple book that I have. I have a collection of short stories by Agatha Christie, all featuring Miss Marple, which I will work through over the course of 2023. So I'm not bidding farewell to Miss Marple completely, but I read the last novel, and that was Sleeping Murder, and I loved it. I am so glad I loved it. I'm so glad I got to end this journey with Miss Marple and Agatha Christie on a high. I read my first Miss Marple in January of 2022, and I read one every month for the whole year. And I love Miss Marple. I love Miss Marple. I think that there are definitely people who love Poirot, and I think there are definitely people who love Marple, and there are very few people who love them both. Poirot, it's neither here nor there for me. Marple, on the other hand, I love them. Those mysteries were different from the Poirot mysteries. The Poirot mysteries are often set around things that have really happened, like the Lindbergh baby or whatever. Like they're set around some form of truth. The Mysterious Affair at Styles, that actually is based on an event that she read about in a newspaper that happened in the town that I lived at, the small town that I lived at in India, in northern India, at the Savoy Hotel there. Not the Savoy, but Missouri's Savoy. So like they're all kind of based on things that have some factual basis. Whereas the Marples, they're all based around like human motive. Like Poirot's too. I'm not finding the right words, but they're all they feel much more human to me as opposed to true crime. And I just really, really liked that humanity. Every one of the mysteries, every one of the murders that happens in the Marple books is somehow a crime that is very human in its origin or its impetus. And that doesn't always feel the case with Poirot. With Poirot, it's more about vices, I think. And so I liked the Marples better. And of course, I read Twelfth Night by William Shakespeare. This was my third read of this, and it is one of my favorites. I gave it 3 stars the first time I read it, and this time I gave it 5. It has grown on me so much. And I think that part of that is just because the first time I read it, it was the first Shakespeare in a very long journey that I was taking at the beginning of 2020. And now I read a Shakespeare a month for the last 3 years. Or watched. This year I watched a few of them instead of read them, and that's okay too. So I'm exposed to a Shakespeare story a month, and I know them all now. And there's something really familiar and reassuring about them, and there's something that's so cohesive about the majority of the work and the way that he's telling stories. And so this year, to end on Twelfth Night, it felt different. It felt like a different read because I have more context and more understanding, and I'm a different person than I was when I read it before. So when I first read it, it was 3 stars. And now that I've read it a couple of years later in a different circumstance, it was 5. And I would highly recommend Twelfth Night. It's a fun, weird little romp, very Shakespearean. So finally, my final read. And now that I've finally gotten to my final read, the dog has kind of calmed down. Of course, isn't that how it always goes? But I finally read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, and it took me almost the entire month to read it because this is a book that will not be rushed. This is a book that wants to take its time, and this is a book that has my whole heart now. Oh my goodness, I loved this book. I don't understand people who say it has no plot. It absolutely has plot. I don't understand people who say that they did not care that they liked the Zachary storyline, but they did not care for the quote unquote extras. They're not extra. I don't understand those comments. This book is phenomenal. This is a staggering work of genius if I ever read one. The storytelling is amazing. The character development is amazing. The fantasy element is amazing. It is twisty. It is turny. It is hard to pin down. It is beautiful. Oh my word, the writing in this is so gorgeous. Nothing is pointless. Nothing is lost. Nothing is purposeless. Are there things that are not wrapped up? Absolutely. But do we know why they're there in the story being told to us here? Yes, we do. I did not like The Night Circus. Everybody loves The Night Circus, and I thought it was average, beyond average. The main thing, well, the 2 main things that made me pick this up were, 1, someone gave it to me. And for now I am eternally grateful that they did. The other major impetus is that it seemed that people who did not like The Night Circus, and they are few and far between, loved this book. And so I thought, hey, maybe that is the story for me too. Maybe if I don't like The Night Circus, I will love The Starless Sea. And that is what happened. I also realized as I was reading this that it reminded me so much of other books that I love. It reminded me a lot of The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. It reminded me a lot of If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. In fact, it reminded me of that one so much that it made me want to reread it, which I probably will try to do in January. It reminded me of The Cartographers, which I loved, which a lot of people did not. It reminded me of the book that I always forget the name of by Pulley, by Natasha Pulley, The Kingdoms. It reminded me of The Kingdoms. All of these stories are entirely different. The storylines are not the thing that are the same. Although If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler is probably the closest to this storyline as far as like story being incredibly important. But and books being maybe kind of alive, or manipulatable. But the commonality that all of these things had was just the worlds that they created and the way that I was ushered in to just accepting the utterly impossible as fact and the norm. There's something in that is magical. I don't always like a book like The Kingdoms, which is both a fantasy but also an alternate history. I don't always like a book that attempts to alter history to tell their story. I kind of feel like sometimes like they've done it because they can't tell the story in the reality that existed. What is that one? Warlight. I think that's what it's called. Warlight by Polk. That's one that I feel like it's obviously set during like World War I era. There's really no reason why you couldn't set it in World War I era and still have your witchcraft. But they keep it nebulous enough that you are never told that it's England in World War I era. And I feel like that's just weak writing. But in The Kingdoms, like everything is different. And you know it. It's brought right to your attention, and it feels like it's how things really are. The writing is so special that way. So in this, at first I was a little bit jarred when I went from reading not initiate, what is the word I'm looking for? Acolyte. So when the story of the Acolyte moves me so much, it feels like forever ago that I read it. So the story of the Acolyte and Sweet Sorrows moves me so much that I read the next story from Sweet Sorrows and about the boy in the door, but I don't really understand what's going on. And so when I get to January 2015 and I meet Zachary, who works with game design, and there's all these Harry Potter references and everything and whatever. And like, it's just so modern. It's so contemporary. I was a little jarred and I was like, ooh, I don't like this. I don't like this because I loved those Sweet Sorrow stories so much, not knowing what the Sweet Sorrow stories were. Then within like the first switchover between Sweet Sorrows and reality, well, Sweet Sorrows and Zachary, I just accepted it and I loved it. And I didn't ever feel like, oh, now I have to read another Sweet Sorrows, which I hear a lot of people saying about this book. And I'm just like, no, that is the story. That is the story. To me, it was more like the Zachary stuff was the extra. But I loved this book. I loved it, and I'm right there with the people who love it. And I've been thinking about it. It's the kind of book that you can think about and think about and think about and think about. You can get totally lost in it. This is the rabbit hole. This is the rabbit hole, and I loved it. And that is what I read in the month of December. Such a good reading month. So varied. So much joy and solid storytelling. some annoying things that I didn't really love. But I'm going to finish up The Big Bang Theory and Blitz and talk to you about those in January. And now I'm going to go take this little beagle for a WALK. She's tried to be such a good girl. Yes, she's tried to be such a good girl. Yes. She has tried. Yes, she has. And now she needs some undivided attention. Yes. And we're going to go. We're going to go read. Bye.